Welcome back to the Menopause Movement Podcast. I'm Dr. Michelle Gordon, and I'm your host. This week, we are going to talk with Miki Sturges. And Miki has a company called the Rise Up Woman, and she says she's primarily on Facebook. She's an expert in the field of resilience and survival from domestic abuse. She has an amazing story, and I'm excited to bring her to you. She also has a podcast called the Rise Up Woman Podcast that she's been publishing since May. Now, I think that learning and understanding more about how to handle and get out of and heal from an abusive relationship is so important. And while it may not be directly related to menopause, some of us may still be in relationships like that. And if you are, we're going to hook up some resources in the show notes for you. So if you're currently in that challenge, you're going to really enjoy this episode. In this episode, we talk about the cycle of shame, angel syndrome, the cycle of abuse, how we live in a patriarchy and how that affects abuse, and how to break up the cycle. Now, at the end of this episode, make sure you visit the website. That's drmichellegordon.com/podcasts. Don't forget the S. And you're going to find the show notes and the links that are mentioned with Miki Sturges. And also, if you enjoy this episode, make sure you subscribe so you're always the first to know when a new episode is released. I also appreciate your 5-star reviews on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for being a part of the menopause movement. Now, here we go. On to Miki. All right. Well, welcome back to the Menopause Movement Podcast. And today I'm joined by Miki Sturges. And Miki's a life coach, and we're going to hear all about her. And so let's get to it. Hi, Miki. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So I guess, the first question I want to ask you is, how did you get involved in life coaching? We'll start with that.
Okay. So it could be a little bit longer, but what happened was I was doing network marketing, and I really enjoyed coaching people. As I grew my team, I started, coaching small amount of people, and I really enjoyed that part of my job. But of course, I had to have my network marketing business going too, and I kept going back to coaching, and I felt like that's what I wanted to do. But then on the way of doing that, I kept hearing messages from God saying, you know what, it's time for you to do this thing, while sharing my story.
Okay.
And I kept denying it. I kept denying, no, that's not me. I don't want to do that, which I will probably get in a little bit later on. But basically, I have this background in domestic violence. I was in the abusive marriage for 13 years, and I didn't want to talk about it. But, it took a long time for healing. But it became, I came to a point where I am able to share stories without tears, I really wanted to help other women. Yet I denied God's voice saying, you need to go to this direction.
Yeah.
And this beginning of this year, God showed up in such a big way, I could not deny it anymore. And I said, okay, yes to God.
Okay, but you got to tell me the story about how God showed up in such a big way. That you can't just say God showed up and then not
talk about it, right?
That's okay. I'm sorry. Well, we all want to see the supernatural in action.
Yes. So mind you, just imagine, I have been hearing this message. You have to share your story in different ways, right? Like some people tell me, or the sermon that I listen to, podcast that I listen to, this message kept popping up, and here I am, kept denying, right? And the beginning of this year, I attended, events called BBD Live. That was for online business event. And there was 200, I think it was like close to 300 people there.
Okay, so you were at the January BBD Live?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Yeah, I was there too.
Yeah. You were? Okay.
Yeah, that's James Whitmore's event. Yeah.
Yes, and I love James.
Yeah, he's
But
great.
anyway, So I was there, and second day he talked about hot seat, how to be on the hot seat. And we went through exercise, and you had to write what if you were to be on hot seat, what you would ask. There's no backstories, nothing like that. So I wrote down thinking, not, I'm not going to be picked. And then as he said, there's a chair, and one person is going to be on this hot seat, and people start raising their hands, right? I want to be on there. And I was one of those. No, not me. I was like, okay, it's time to hide. Well, he said this person manifested to be on this hot seat this morning. And I was like, nah, I didn't manifest anything. And he said, he didn't pick those people who raised hand. He said, there's something under your seat. Look under your seat. If you have a little paper that says hot seat, that's you. Well, that was me.
Wow. I missed that part. I think I was in a meeting. So,
maybe you might have been.
Yeah.
But, oh, yeah.
That was the morning of the second day?
I think so. It was a second day.
Yeah, I missed that.
So I looked at it and go, oh my gosh, do you have it? Do you have this seat? And I was talking to other people, do you have this paper? He goes, no, that's you. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I went on the hot seat, and you know what? So on my paper, I wrote my hot seat question. I didn't talk about online business. I could have written about funnels or whatever, but yeah. I wrote, I'm thinking about this. I keep hearing this message. I want to do this, but I'm scared. So that's what I wrote. And then that's what I shared on my hot seat. Oh my goodness. I realized, oh my goodness, this is God's way of shaking me. Miki, wake up. James asked me during the hot seat, he said, so how long have you been sitting on this idea? And I said, I think at least 2 years. And then he goes, how long are you going to sit there? And it really impacted me. And that's when I decided, you know what, I'm going to be all in. Yet within a month or two, I kept still hanging on to that business coaching. I really wanted to help network marketers go, in the business online. And I heard the voice again. He said, what else can you let go? And I knew God was talking to me about letting go of everything else and go all in with this. So that's when I really decided, okay, this is the way I am going. I might not make money right away, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I just keep trusting the process.
So what's interesting to me is that you had to lean into a fear.
Oh yeah, totally.
All right. And when you leaned into your fear, you had a big breakthrough. Mm-hmm. Right. And part of leaning into your fear was surrendering to whatever the plan was. Mm-hmm. And I think that what happens is that, we hear this phrase, focus on the process and the outcome will take care of itself. But then we don't often see the results, right?
Right.
So, if you want to lose 100 pounds, right? You're not going to lose 100 pounds overnight. You're going to lose 100 pounds by, exercising regularly, watching what you eat, and drinking a ton more water, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And you have to focus on that process, or else you're never, because your behavior is what caused you to gain the 100 pounds. And so your behavior is going to be what's going to cause you to lose the 100 pounds. Same sort of thing, right? So here you are, not wanting to share the story, right?
Oh, I was scared.
Afraid to share your story. So I want to give you an opportunity now to tell the story. So let's hear the story.
Okay, so my story it really began when I first moved from Japan to America.
Okay.
And at that time, I was full of energy. I graduated college from Japan. In Japan, my major was English, English literature. So I really loved the language of English, and I wanted to stay here to learn and really master the English. And that's where I met my ex-husband. And my dream, of course, was to be an interpreter, and I wanted to go back to Japan and be this famous interpreter, on TV, those people who see on TV. Well, that was my dream. But then I met him and I started in the wrong direction. I knew he was a little controlling, but I made a commitment, and this is one of the things that backfired. My value backfired, because my value was, once you marry, you stay with the person no matter what. And I think I gave it all. So within the whole 13 years of marriage, it was very abusive. I didn't even realize it was abusive, because I grew up in a country in Japan, and my family was very traditional. My father was not abusive, but he was the authority in my family. So men being an authority and dominant position is not necessarily bad or abnormal. It was normal for me. But when he started hitting me and shoving to the wall, or pushing me or kicking me, then that's when I said, is this normal? But I kept, praying to God, you can change him if that's your will. And I just kept staying. One, I was fearful. If I left, what is he going to come after me? Is he going to kill me? I was not sure. But so that 13 years came. At the end of 13 years, what happened was I was this different person in a corporate world. I was, in a management position. I put the facade, very confident at job. But when I went home, I was this little person worth nothing. I believed worth nothing, because that's what I was hearing all the time. And so what happened was, when I there was a company trip that I had to take employees to Japan, came back. He just went off if I had an affair with anybody, blah, blah, blah. And I just could not stand the accusation. So I said, you know what? It might be time for us to separate. And at that time, he was like, what are you saying? And he didn't do anything. So I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing that he's not doing anything. But later on, he brought a gun and pointed at me and said, if you ever make me mad like this again, I'll kill you. If you ever tell me if you're gonna leave me, I'll kill you. So I, at that point, said, I cannot ever promise you to not make you mad, because it's your choice. You're making a choice to be mad. I can't control that. So why don't you just shoot me now?
Wow.
And he said, he was looking at me like, and he said to me, you are crazy. I'm like, okay, who's crazy here? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he pulled up. Luckily, he came to his senses, I guess, or something, and he put the gun down and walked away, just maybe a couple feet. So I ran to the bathroom and I shut the door, locked the door, and I started just sobbing. God, I don't know what to do with this. I really don't know. And I wasn't even praying to God. Looking back at it, I was. But I was like, whoever, just help me. I don't know what to do. And I knew my son at the time, 3-year-old, he was sleeping in the other room. And I was thinking about him. I didn't know. I knew I didn't want him to grow up in that situation. I didn't want him to grow up thinking men could just abuse women like that and control women. And I was afraid that he's going to be like that and cycle continue, Mm-hmm. I just didn't want that. But I didn't know what to do, because he had a gun, the other side of the bathroom. And I don't know how long I was in there, but he knocked on the door and he said, I'm sorry. This is a cycle of abuse. It goes through a cycle. And he said, I'm sorry. I put the gun away. Just come out. You're okay. I'm not going to do anything to you. So I came out. And at that point, I decided I'm not going to stir anymore. I'm not going to make waves, anything. I just wanted to survive at that point. So that's what I did. I said, okay, I'm sorry I said anything. I will stay with you. And but inside of me, of course, I was like, what am I going to do? And luckily, I think that was Sunday maybe, because I went to work the next day and I called my pastor.
Yeah.
And I said, Pastor, this happened. And he was in shock because even though he was my pastor, my favorite pastor, he was always, I was counseling with him and throughout my marriage, I went counseling with him, both of us. So he knew about us, but I never, ever shared the abuse part of our marriage. I never told him that he was hitting me or anything like physically or verbally. And he apologized. He said, I'm so sorry. I didn't know this was going on. If I knew, I could have said something else. But, because he thought this was normal, like argument, the normal marriage argument, he was saying, you need to do this and, this kind of, so he was just giving us the counseling that he would do to a normal marriage because I never shared.
Yeah.
And he was in shock.
I can't imagine why you would share if you're getting beaten at home in a public forum if you're afraid.
Oh, I was very afraid. Yeah. So I never, and also afraid. And also I was, I think, embarrassed.
Sure.
That, I knew it in the back of my head, this is not normal.
Yeah.
But I was ashamed that I was taking it.
Mm.
I shared some of stories with my friends, and my friends didn't understand why I would stay. Mm-hmm. They were like, if it's so bad, why don't you just leave? So they probably didn't believe it was that bad. Maybe,
Yeah, I think that this is a common story that we hear over and over and over in the cycle of abuse. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That, especially in marriages, and it's a lot more common than anyone wants to admit. You're not in menopause yet, right?
Oh, it's done.
Oh, you're done with menopause?
It's done.
Oh, you're young.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I went through it I think 4 years ago.
Okay.
4 years ago. Yeah.
All right. And you're not still suffering from the symptoms at all?
Not really.
So that's interesting.
I'm lucky.
Because I've interviewed several women who still have symptoms 20 years later. So.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's common. It can happen. So, all right. So good. I actually thought you were younger. How old is your son now?
My son is 23.
23. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So,
and I'm glad that he didn't really take on. But the other side of that is that he became enabler. He became not enabler. He became one of those who don't want to rock the boat. Okay. He is almost like a peacemaker. He doesn't get mad. So sometimes I worry, that he suppresses his feelings.
Yeah. It's hard with our children. We have to let them go.
Yeah.
We have to let them go.
It's hard.
Make their own mistakes, and we can see them making the mistakes, and we have to let them go. And I often wonder, in all the mistakes I made as a young adult, even up until the time my father passed, I always wonder if, he knew he couldn't say anything to me. I'd never listen to him, and so it's interesting because now he's gone and I miss him, but, we have to let our children make their own mistakes. And at some point, it's just really important to let them go and let them be who they are.
It's hard.
It really is. It really is. I mean, this is part of, the changes of menopause too, right? I mean, our kids grow up and then they're out of the house and we're not really sure what to do. And then on the converse of that, if we've been in an abusive marriage and our kids are gone, the abuse can escalate once the kids leave because there's no buffer
possible. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a bit about, and I want you to finish your story, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about how the fear of leaving affects women in an abusive marriage and why it's not easy to leave.
Oh, yeah. Well, like I was saying, even when you have this powerful side to you, because of the abuse, because of the verbal put down and things that kept repeated, it becomes a belief. If you keep hearing this over and over and over, and you start to think, maybe I am stupid. Oh, maybe I am worthless. Oh, maybe I am. Then you start to believe that. So even if you leave, in my case, I left, I still suffered the consequence of low self-esteem. I would go to we can all push to a certain degree, right?
Yeah.
Your will can just push, but somewhere along the way, your subconscious start talking. No, who do you think you are? You can't do this. You can't do that. And then all of a sudden you hit the ceiling, and ceiling might be this high, yet because of your belief, because of what happened, totally your brain is rewired to believe this is it.
Yeah.
You can't go any higher.
I talk a lot in my program about beliefs. We do that. We go through beliefs a lot. And we talk about how a belief is a thought that you think over and over, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And a thought is just a sentence in your head, and a belief is a sentence you say over and over.
Over and over.
And one of the things that is so transformative in my program is I show them how it's possible to change the beliefs. And when that happens, there's light bulbs. There's light bulbs everywhere, because it's like, this belief isn't serving me. Then, you mean I can just change it? And it's really, it's so transformative and so freeing.
And liberating.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. That's why it took a long time, even though I was a personal development junkie. Because I was in sales and I would listen to Brian Tracy and all these things in cassettes.
Sure.
Do you remember cassette, right?
Yes.
So I would put the cassette in the car, and I would listen all the time to Anthony Robbins, and so it was like one of these, but it was the will power. That doesn't really work until to a point. And I didn't realize until I really start to learn about abuse, cycle abuse, and all these things, I didn't realize my brain was completely rewired during that 13 years of marriage. From the beginning, what you wear is horrible. You need to be like an American. You need to ditch all your Japanese clothes and rebuy all these things. And he used to tell me, he would take me to the mall and say, this is something that my sister would wear, so why don't you buy that? And I had to think about how his sister would dress, and then I had to buy those things, even though I didn't think it was for me. Things like that. And then over and over, if you're told, just because you're making money, that doesn't mean that you're worth anything. You're nothing without me. And I kept believing it. So you're right. Nobody would take me. Nobody would love me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So all of a sudden at the end of 13 years, I was like, okay, who am I?
Okay. So you had a crisis of identity.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I did.
So I wanted to, so you were in sales in your corporate job? Is that what you did?
Well, I did a lot of things, but at the last job I was in HR. I was an HR director. But
that's not a fun job.
Oh, I loved it.
Did you really?
Yes, I did.
Excuse
I
me.
actually love those things and legal things, and I was
Oh yeah, no,
enjoyed it.
HR, man, that's my nemesis. Um, so I
Yeah.
wanted to talk a bit about before you get to how you actually left. I wanted to
Mhm.
talk about if we could just go through the phases of the cycle of shame.
Mm. Mhm.
So, do you have like phases that
Oh,
you
yes.
can delineate? So
So
that's I think that would be really helpful for the listeners because if there's anyone
mhm,
who's listening who is in a relationship like this and wants to leave, we're going to make sure that we hook up some resources in the show notes. So one
mhm.
of the things I'd like from you is resources for domestic abuse and
Sure.
numbers that people can call and that sort of thing. And we'll put those in the show notes so that anyone who's in this in a relationship that really would be safer if they left, but is afraid. We're going
Mhm.
to talk about all of these things because it's a
Yeah.
lot more common than a lot of us would admit. And while we don't want anyone to put their lives in danger, we also want you to be safe, and we want you also to, if you're in something abusive, to have the courage to leave
Yeah.
because you're worth it.
Oh, totally, totally.
Yeah,
And nobody deserves to be beaten or hit or belittled,
yeah,
even just verbally.
yeah,
And I didn't realize. I thought the abuse was just physical, but it's more than that. Emotional abuse and verbal. Those things affects a lot more. It cuts you through to your core.
yeah. It
Who you
does.
are.
And
So.
especially if you've suffered abuse as a child, in any form, even if it's your parent
Mhm.
saying things,
Mhm.
you know, I mean, we all suffer some sort of trauma as children. That's part of growing up. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
and that's how we form our identity. But in terms of abusive childhood, that can whatever happens in our childhood, we can attract similar people,
yeah.
or we can repel similar people, and it just depends
Mhm.
on our own self-esteem. So let's get to the cycle of shame. So let's talk
Yeah.
about that.
So the cycle is first when you first meet, like when in my case, I met him and he was this like really a macho, and I was just really attracted to that. He knew he was like street smart, where I was very naive. I grew up in a very warm, almost like sheltered household, and I came here and then I met this guy and I say, oh my goodness, I thought he would just be able to protect me all the time.
Yeah.
So I was really attracted to that macho-ness. And so everything was fine, but something happens, like something that triggers him or whatever. So it goes into this cycle of, okay, he hits you, or something happens, it triggers, and then he gets really mad, and boom, maybe physical, something happens, right? And then he goes through remorse. He was, I don't call it's a true remorse, but he will say, oh, I'm so sorry, this will never happen again, I'm so sorry, and you believe it. So I believed, okay, well, he said he's going to change, he's not going to do this again, so okay, I'll give you a chance. And it will go through like a sort of like honeymoon stage. Oh, that's great. He might bring you flowers. He might buy you cake. He might take you out to dinner. He would just do all these loving things. We call it a honeymoon stage. And then everything seems to be going well. But again, something triggers. And then boom, once again, this happens. And then he apologizes again, honeymoon stage comes, and then starts again. The cycle goes on and on. It could be, in my case, it was sort of like almost like an everyday occurrence. And then it became once a week, like weekends. I hated weekends because we had to, during the week, we go to work, it's just so busy. But weekends we're together. So something happens at least once a week. I will be hit or just belittled. I pretty much he like push me against the wall or whatever, something happens, right? And then he apologizes. And I said, okay, I'll trust you. I will, give you a chance. Over and over and over. Pretty soon, your self-esteem, everything is shattered. the bottom, and you don't even realize it.
Yeah.
So that's
Did you grow up with any sort of, what was your religion growing up?
my religion. I believe it's Shintoism.
Okay.
But my grandma was very devout Buddhist.
Buddhist. Okay.
Yeah.
And
So,
did you learn how to meditate as a child?
no, I never learned that.
Okay.
We didn't do any of that. Even though like my grandma would chant like every morning, that
so
chanting.
she had her chanting meditation.
Yeah.
So you never learned how to separate yourself from other people to go inside and
no, no,
okay.
I never learned that.
And have you learned that since?
Well, it's not that sense of, like a Buddhism or anything like that. But yes, I do. I wouldn't say inner self. I will always have a connection with God, my faith in God. I'm a Christian, and I do a lot of talk with God, prayers.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I do that a lot, and I journal.
Yeah, that's sure. Yeah, when I was really into Christianity, I'm not so Christian anymore, but I mean, I believe in Christ, but there were times when I would do a lot of journaling, and the journaling I was able to see God would come through.
Oh yeah.
God would come through. But I've more recently been doing a lot more studying on the mind and self-realization, which is through meditation. That's the way you can find God. And really,
totally.
And in reality, I mean, it's like how Joe Dispenza talks about it is it's crossing the river. And once you cross the river, you enter into the subconscious, or Yogananda calls it, the way you can get to the astral plane through the third eye. Whatever it is. The bottom line is I think we all end up in the same place. We end up in the subconscious, right? And in order for us to rewire all of those old beliefs, we have to get to the subconscious.
Oh, totally. I'm learning that too.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how your subconscious really drives you in a different ways. And like I was sharing before, growing up, my father was the authority figure.
Yeah.
And he, I don't even remember. He wasn't abusive in my eyes. But he abused alcohol, and my mom hated that. I could just tell that she was just not taking it well. And I remember, he would just drink, and then he would throw up, and she had to clean up, and and she was just really complaining, if you didn't drink this much, you wouldn't I didn't have to clean this up, mess up, and I hated seeing that.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the reasons why I developed aversion. I cannot drink. And of course it's my choice to not drink anymore. I did drink before when I was in college, but when I was in college, I was having hives after I drank.
Oh, probably because of your experience with your father. Your subconscious was coming back and saying, this is poison, don't do this.
Yes, probably. I would just like laugh and go, oh my gosh, I'm getting all these hives, And then I thought it was something that I ate, but it happened every time I drank. So I decided, okay, this must be alcohol that's, doing this to me.
Yeah.
But the mind is so powerful, right? So if once you believe alcohol is causing me hives, I just totally lost my interest in anything like that. Sure. So I don't drink at all. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand. I totally understand that.
Yeah.
So tell me, let's hear the story of how you were able to leave your husband.
Well, I'm so blessed to know that pastor. I think that the pastor, having a resource like that, having resources is very important, before that, I didn't realize I had the resources, but I didn't, because I was so ashamed. I didn't want to go to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I came to a point where it's either I'm going to be killed and my boy is going to live without the mother, or I do something about it and live a better life.
Yeah.
And I had to make that choice. And I just did not want my son to live like that. And I had to, like, I was thinking, I have to break this cycle. I cannot continue, because I knew my ex-husband, was abused also. And so that cycle was going on with that family.
Yeah.
Right. And I didn't want my son to continue with that. And also, of course, I think that was my first thing that came to my mind. I did not want my son. As I do have a podcast also. And as I interview some women who have gone through this, many of them say, I thought about my son. I thought about my daughter.
What's the name of your podcast?
The Rise Up Woman podcast.
The Rise Up Woman. Okay.
Yeah. And so I was thinking, you know what? This little human being has big power on moms. Even though when I was alone, I didn't have courage to leave. But this little human that I was caring for, and he needed me. He needed mom.
Yeah.
So I said, I just have to do that for him. So that was a big courage, something beside myself, beyond myself. Yeah. He needed me. And that was the biggest reason, I think, more so than me, because I was ready to be shot. I was like, go ahead and shoot me. I can't live like this, right? But then when I came to sense it, I said, you know what? He needs me. I need to be well. And that was a big, big moment.
Well, you also had somebody who believed you. And I think one of the things that happens is that, especially in America, because we live in a patriarchy, and it isn't just America, right? It's like the whole world is pretty much a patriarchy. Right. I mean, think about the number of female leaders in the world, right?
Yeah.
We had Golda Meir. We had Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, Thatcher. Mm-hmm.
We had Indira Gandhi.
Yeah.
Right. And we had the woman in Pakistan, and I can't remember her name. And there was a big controversy about her being.
Oh yeah,
discharged.
Totally.
And then there's a woman in Myanmar, but it's that's Myanmar is very controversial right now with what they're doing on the borders with the Rohingya. But if that's one hand, the female leaders. I mean, Ethiopia just got a female president, and I'll admittedly, for anyone who's listening, who's a big geography and history buff, I actually, these are things I just know out of my own knowledge, and I may have missed a lot of them. So don't hold me to it. But what I'm talking about is that we live in a patriarchy, and in order for us to be believed, okay, so I was sexually abused as a child, and when I finally, I had a whole time that I didn't remember. And at age 15, I just, I had an aha, something woke up inside me and I realized it. And when I told people, no one believed me. Right. And so the fact that you had the support of somebody in the clergy, especially like a Christian pastor, I'm actually surprised, to tell you the truth. Because it's very common that the Christians, especially, will tell women to subject themselves to their husband no matter what.
Yeah.
And if you're in a position like that, that's wrong.
It's hopeless.
It's
yeah. If something like that. Yeah.
And
I was lucky.
Yeah. And so, just because, that's because that's something that Paul said. Paul was a man. Remember, the Bible was written by men. It wasn't written by God. It was written by men. Men put words on paper and said it was sacred. So, it's only sacred because we think it is. It's nothing. It's another belief. Right. And so the words of Paul are not, he was just a guy, and he was a guy who hated women. I mean, when you look at what he wrote and how women have to keep their heads covered and women have to be silent in the church and women have to do this and women have to do that. There's this really great book that I talk about a lot. It's called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. And it is probably the best religious history book I've ever read. And it's all about how before written language, all the gods were female because life comes from women. And then as written language became more and more prevalent and we started using the other side of the brain, the female gods got murdered by the male gods. It's a fascinating read. I recommend that everyone read it. Great book on the patriarchy, written by a man, actually a surgeon. But so the point I was trying to make is that you had support. And you had support from somebody in the church, which is very surprising, especially a male pastor.
Well, I trusted him too, and because I was at that church for a long, long time, and he was very supportive, and he, of course, believed what happened, and he gave me a lot of resources. His brother just so happened to be assistant DA.
Oh, wow.
At the police department. So he gave me a lot of resources, and I contacted each one of he gave me a resource to contact, I think, one of the police department, and then they gave me a domestic violence shelter number. So that was just really good, and I just believe that it was a plan. It was there, and at that point, I just this is what I didn't share, is that after I decided not rock the boat, I planned. This was like a plan because I knew my ex-husband was going on a business trip. I knew that was coming like in 2 weeks or something like that. I don't remember that, not that time, but I knew that was coming. He was going to Taiwan with a business trip. And so I said, you know what? I have this plan. Like in my head, I had all this plan. Until then, I just have to stay calm. I don't rock the boat. I don't want to do anything to make him mad, right?
Yeah.
So I was like walking on the eggshell. But I knew. So when I contacted the domestic violence shelter, they said, well, I later found out that's how they do like protocol. What they do is they say, well, we don't have a room for you at this moment. And it's sort of like, it's the way to filter those people who just want to come in to stay, overnight or whatever. Like some people do that, take advantage of that. And so I said, this is my plan. I said, my husband is going on business trip, blah, 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 blah. And she goes, okay, then call me back and see if we have a room by the time when you're ready to go. So I said, okay. So I contacted, I think it was like 2 days before or something like that, before he left. I said, I'm ready. He's actually leaving that day. He said, okay, call me that morning. So I did. And boom, everything. That day, I just put everything, whatever. I thought I was just going to be there 1 week. Yeah. So I took 1 week of my clothes, my boys' clothes, and I took my blankets and all this stuff in the van, and I had to go to a police department, and the police escorted us to the shelter. But I was shaking as I packed my stuff. I was just shaking. What if he comes back right now? What's going to happen? I was just like in a hurry, Yeah. I was so afraid. But after I was in the shelter, that's a whole another story because I was told not to listen to my voicemail, but I listened to them. And, because I had access to my voicemail for work, he was leaving tons and tons of messages, just crying and lying about my dog. And it was just crazy. And
so, I mean, I think that brings back the point that abusers, probably most of them are narcissists, and and they're going to pull out all the stops.
Oh,
you leave them, and they're master manipulators.
Totally. He said we had 3 Cocker Spaniels, and I love them. They're just good dogs. And he said he left a message saying, Sarah was that one of the dog, and she died. you need to come home. I miss her and all these things. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I was crying. I was like, oh my gosh, she died.
Oh,
Then I went to pick up some of my stuff one day. She was there. I was like, what? You said, I was like, oh my
yeah.
gosh, he lied about it. And later on, I had a time to talk to him. I said, you said Sarah died. Well, I had to say something so that you could come home. I'm like, no.
Wow.
It was yeah, he did that. And there's several times by seeing my son, he was missing his papa, and I could just his shoulder was just shaking with crying. And even then I said, you know what, I should go back. And so I was so blessed to have been in the shelter, because all the people in the shelter, don't you go back. And then one of the ladies counselors shared a story. She said, you remind me of this lady. Well, she was Korean lady. She said, because I'm an Asian, right? So I reminded her
I'm
of
sorry.
her.
That sounds a little racist.
No, that's probably why because I'm Asian, she probably said, well, you remind me of this person, and this person was Korean. And she said, she went back like you. She was, she said, I'm going to go back. And she did go back. She came back 3 times to the shelter, and she never came back. Do you know why?
He killed her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she said, please, if you want to go back, it's up to you, but don't just think about that. How long have you been in this situation? How many times did he apologize? How many times do you have to go through this?
Yeah.
Even for your child, your child doesn't know. Maybe that's why he misses him, but think about how he is going to grow up. And I had to really let those sink in. And I never forgot that story. I didn't want to be like that. There were women who were coming in and out 2 or 3 times. And either they leave finally, or they get killed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And it's not uncommon. I mean, I don't have the statistics here, but it's not uncommon that a woman will be killed by an abusive spouse or domestic partner.
It's just heartbreaking.
It is.
Yeah. So that's why, no wonder, I don't think it's everybody's duty to share their stories. There are some people who just don't want to. Mm-hmm. But I just felt like this was one of my calling. I just felt like I had to do that.
Yeah. One of the questions I have for you, and this is something I hear quite a bit when I talk to women who've been abused, is that if they internalize it, say it's my fault, and I'm a failure.
Yeah. I did that. I did that a lot, because, that's what he said. He said, if you just didn't make me mad, I wouldn't do this.
Right.
I would be a nice person.
And that's so like, nobody can make anybody else anything.
Right. I
just want to clarify that for the audience who's listening.
Yes.
Is that you are not responsible for anyone else's feelings.
No.
And if someone else says that you're making them feel a certain way, that is not on you. That is about them.
Right.
So you can't make somebody feel something. Somebody makes a choice. There's a data comes in, they make a choice, and they react a certain way. And that is their choice. That's about them. It's not about you. And so never take that as a personal thing.
I wanted to share one thing. Sure. This is also a syndrome. It's called angel syndrome.
What's it called?
And angel syndrome.
Angel syndrome. Okay.
Yeah. Well, what it is that I was sent by God to change this person, to save this person, right? And I felt that. I felt like maybe God sent me to his life so that he could be better. He could, it's like, who am I? No, it's not my responsibility to change him. But that's how I felt.
Right.
I felt like, okay, well, I grew up in a totally different situation than he did. He was kicked out of the house. He had ADHD at that, our age group, there was no diagnosed ADHD, right? So there was maybe some kids just told you are too hyper or too this, and you have dyslexia and all these things. And he was one of those wild boys, I guess, and he was kicked out of the house. And he grew up in Hispanic culture where male was dominant, but
like everywhere else.
Yes. And so he shared with me that he had a rough childhood, and I felt really bad for him because I didn't grow up. I was in a warm environment, two loving parents. I went to a private school, and I did what I wanted to do to study English, and I had a normal childhood. So I felt really bad for him. I was like, wow, you had a tough time, So I'm trying to give him understanding of, okay, where he's coming from. And maybe I'm here to support, encourage, and uplift him, by me being beaten and being blamed for his actions. And I took it.
Yeah.
I took
and
it.
abusers are often raised in an abusive home where that's how they see women treated.
Yeah.
And that's the way that women are supposed to be treated. And so they don't know anything different, and they don't challenge that belief. And so again, if a belief, if a thought is a sentence in your mind, a belief is a sentence you say over and over again. And that is, women have to subjugate themselves to men, and it's okay for men to hit women. And that's a belief that some boys grow up with. And that's, unfortunate, but that's the truth.
Yeah. So that's the reason why I didn't want my boy, to grow up in that.
Yeah. So what's life for you like now? You're on the other side of it. You've been out of this marriage for several years now. You made it out of the shelter, and you've started this new business where you're helping women kind of rise up, right?
Yes.
So let's get to the happiness.
Yes.
The good part.
No, well, it took a while, but I met my current husband, and after a while, and I have two boys with him, and marriage is a journey. Marriage is not all rosy, right? We still go through some tough times. We have difficult times too, but the difference is that we can say whatever we want in a, of course, nice manner, right? And arguments happen even between friends, always happens.
Yeah.
But the difference is there's no physical fight. There's no unsafeness, that I don't have to worry about, well, is he going to belittle me? Is he going to hit me? I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. I think in marriage, how to approach a relationship as an adult, especially like a marriage contract, or a love relationship, is that you have to expect that person, because we're not perfect, that person is not perfect. They're going to do things that hurt you, and you're going to do things that hurt them.
Yes.
And the healthy adult will work through those things. Yes. We'll talk about it. This is how it made me feel. This is what I think. Why did this happen? And then you come to some sort of an agreement.
Yes.
That's it.
Healthy. Yeah, that's healthy. And I didn't know that. I was like, this is the healthy relationship. Sometimes I was like, is this real healthy? But at the end of the day, that's how I feel. And it's so important to have same value. And the value system that we have, I just wanted to make sure that we did that before we got married.
Yeah.
And that was so important. And I didn't even think about value in the past. It's like, whoa,
Well,
how
I think
important
we're
the value
so
system is.
I think it's very common for us to kind of fall in lust with someone and think that that's love.
Mhm.
You know, there's a lot of sexual chemistry, and
Yeah,
then we try to work around that instead of coming
yeah,
from a place of friendship, common values, and then, you know, something that blossoms into something sexual. And it's and I think most marriages are really based on, you know, something that started out as a, you know, they fell in lust, and so then there was a
yeah,
baby, or there was, you know, whatever, and they tried to make it work.
yeah.
And and the other thing that happens is sometimes you just outgrow the other person, and it's just time to move on.
Mhm.
And you know, I mean, look, I'm not sure. I mean, I marriage is a contract.
Mhm.
I mean, you know, in the strictest sense of the word, it's a contract between two people that if you
Yeah,
decide to divorce, you have to break it up. You know, you break
yeah,
the contract, and that's you know, you either work it out or you don't. I read
yeah,
this
you're
book a
right.
few years ago that was recommended by Hal Elrod of all people,
Mm.
and
Yeah, I
it's
love
called
her
How
how.
to Be an Adult in Relationships. And
Oh,
um, that's a book. I was doing Miracle Morning, and I read that book 20 minutes a day. It was a really tough book. It was hard to get through. But
huh.
I do recommend that everyone read it because it
Oh,
does
I'm
help.
gonna read that.
How to Be an Adult in Relationships by David Richo. And it's, we'll make sure we hook that up in the show notes as well. It's a difficult book. He's a psychologist, so it's kind of academic, but it was a great book for me to see that, to help realize that I'm the one in charge of my own reactions.
Mhm.
You know, no one else can make me react.
Yeah, for sure.
You know.
Yeah, you're
So
right.
what I want to hear from you now is tell me about Rise Up Woman.
Yeah. Um, can I say this before we
Sure.
move on? I left out a very important part. It could be controversial,
Okay.
but I know you. So
Yeah.
I know, so we can talk about this, right?
Yeah.
The controversial things. So what happened was, you just remind me, you just said, when you go into a relationship, there may be, you know, it usually starts out something sexual, and, you know, maybe because of the baby or whatever. So that's what happened with me. So what happened was, just, I was like, wow, you know, attracted to him, right?
Yeah.
And I got pregnant. And I was so afraid. I was young, I was 21. And in my country, it was, it's sort of like, well, if you are not married and you have a child, that's not very good, right? Right. And so even though he was actually happy, he wanted to have a baby, and I was happy, but I was afraid at the same time. And I made a choice to abort.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had an abortion without telling him. He was so upset that even though I told him, I lied to him saying, I had a miscarriage, I'm sorry. He didn't believe me. He said, you went out and got an abortion, didn't you? And kicked the hell out of me. He
And
kicked
that was
me.
before you got married.
Yeah, this was before I got married.
Wow.
And I was bruised all over. I could not go back to school for at least a week. I was bleeding, right, because of the abortion. But he did that to me, and I blamed myself.
Yeah.
I said, I did this horrible, horrible thing. I still hurt to think about it, you know, but I did make that choice.
Yeah.
And I
I'm
know
going
it's
to
a
say
controversial
that,
thing.
you know, to there's a parable that I like to tell my audience. It's the
Mm,
parable of the second arrow. Okay. So
mm,
the Buddha is sitting, the Buddha is sitting, and one of his devotees comes up to him and says, Lord, why do I hurt right here? And he says, well, there's an arrow there. He's like, oh, okay. And he said, but you've got an arrow there. If I were
mm,
to shoot you with another arrow in that same place, would it hurt? And he says, well, yeah, it hurt more. Why do you shoot yourself with second and third arrows?
mm.
So a thing is a thing. Okay. You made a choice in the moment as a child, as a young adult. You weren't ready to have a child.
Yeah.
That's fine. It's a thing. But if you continue to go back and be sad about it, you're just continuing to shoot more arrows at yourself.
Yeah. You're right.
Right? So
That's the reason why I decided to share.
well, thank you for sharing that.
I couldn't share that story because I was so ashamed.
Yeah.
And I was so hurt. And I couldn't share. I tell you, this was what? How many years ago is that? That's like 30 some years ago now.
Sure.
Right? Yet I could not share until I started this podcast, right? In May.
Uh-huh.
I shared that like second or third episode. And I realized how much when you talk about arrows, man, I don't know how many arrows I had in my heart because of that.
Right. And the thing we have to do is that there's something else I teach in my course, and it's good thing, bad thing, who knows? It's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, who knows?
Yeah.
It's just a thing. And so that's part of detaching from outcome, right? And at the end of the day, we can't go back and change the past. We can't, right? And so I came to a realization in the last year that everything I've done, all the bad choices, the good choices, the regrets, the disappointments, everything has led me to this, to where I am now.
Yeah.
Where I can become who I'm supposed to become.
Yes.
And put the message out that I'm supposed to put out.
Amen to that.
Right? And so the same thing, free yourself of that regret, because it's not helping you. It's just dragging you down.
Thank you.
And that's probably the most help I can give you, in this short time.
Yes. Thank you.
Every time you start to feel that shame, when you remember that, there's a whole thing about opening your heart center and allowing, and for you, I'll just talk about it as Christ. Allow the forgiveness of Christ into your heart, because he doesn't care. He doesn't care.
Yeah.
He never said anything about abortion. He doesn't give a shit. He loves us no matter what. He said nothing about the gays. He said nothing about abortion. He said nothing about any of that stuff. This is all men's thoughts putting control on women.
Oh, yeah.
It's our body. We choose. You made a choice. That was your choice. It was okay. I'm telling you it was okay. I'm giving you permission.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Right? It just came to me because, I that's one of the part. It's very important to share this because even though I felt it was a horrible thing, I had to pay back to him. So I felt at that moment it was my duty to stay with him no matter what. Well, everyone, please listen. Yeah. You don't owe anything to anyone.
That's right. That's right. You don't owe anything to anyone.
It's so important
to yourself.
To know. Yes.
We're here, I think we're put here to discover a spiritual path. That's what I truly believe. That we come from spirit, we return to spirit, and we're in a sack of skin so that we can learn to be spirit. That's what I truly believe. Yeah. So let's talk about
to grace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so maybe I'm not, because that's a religious dogma, and I don't think we need religion to find God.
Right. No, you don't. But what I'm saying is you have to give yourself a permission to be graceful, and grateful for what you have. But you going back to the Rise Up Woman. So so the Rise Up Woman it just came to me and say, rise up, everyone. No matter what happens in the past, you still have a choice to rise up from the occasion. All the bad stuff that you've done or it's happening, you can still rise up to be the person that you're meant to be.
Absolutely.
Or better version of yourself. So that's the reason why. And I came up with that. And of course, because of my, background, what happened to me, I was thinking, well, these people who have gone through abuse or trauma like that really lose themselves. And there are like on the Facebook, there are places where domestic abuse is talked about. But all I see is, oh, this is happening to me. Oh, that's happening to me. Help me. No, I didn't want to go that route. I wanted to go to the route where, hey, you know what? That happened. Yeah, we can talk about it, but don't stay there.
Exactly. Well, it becomes your superpower, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can either be a victim or we can rise up.
Victor. Yeah,
Yeah.
rise up. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't really talk about, so what happened to you? I don't do that in my group. I would just say, yeah, if you want to share, go ahead and share. This is a safe place to share. And we'll pray for you. But don't stay there. Don't stay there.
That's so interesting, because in my Facebook group as well, when women come on and just start complaining, I tell them to stop. I said that this is not about complaining. Menopause, suffering is optional in menopause, and I think suffering is optional all throughout life, actually.
Yes.
And while we may have bouts where we're down and things are hard, we can choose to suffer, or we can still have a great day.
Yes.
It's a choice. It's all dependent on our vibration, and we can choose to raise our vibration just by choosing joy.
Yes.
Choosing gratitude.
Yes.
And that's where we are.
So that's the reason there.
Any last thoughts for the ladies and gentlemen listening? Any last parting thoughts?
Well, the parting thought, we talked a lot about women.
Yeah.
And I totally believe that we have right to be who you are.
Yeah.
Right. And also, what I would like to not leave out is men who might have been an abuser. A lot of people who might want to get out of that, but they don't know. They don't know what to do. Their anger or resentment, all these things just comes out and just start beating women or animal or whatever. There is a hope. There are some resources. I just shared in my, I think in my group, there's a group of men who try to stop that cycle. And until, women can rise up and do all these things, but as long as those men who abuse exist, it won't stop.
I think it's the same thing, though. Behavior comes from beliefs,
and
beliefs are subconscious programming. And the main thing to do is to understand, get to the point where we can, the subconscious is not negative, is not. And the other thing is listening to that voice in your head. That voice in your head can either be, it takes both sides.
Yes.
I was just talking yesterday with Stephanie Davis, who's the Enneagram expert, and we're talking about how in Michael Singer's book, the Untethered Soul, he talks about the voice in your head that's really your roommate, and the roommate in your head takes both sides. It's like, oh, you really fucked up. Oh, you're really amazing, and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so, at the end of the day, that voice is not who we are. And once we realize that we are not the voice, that we are the observer of the voice, then we can really understand our identity a lot more.
Yeah.
And start to make some changes. So,
but you want to be there. You want to be, there are people who said, yeah, that's who I am and I don't want to change, and there are people like that. And then I'm sorry, you can't do anything about that.
Right. Right.
But it's still I feel like it's our duty to really share that, there's a hope. There's a place where you want to be, peace, and there only joy exists. That's where we want to be. Then you need to start. I mean, we ourselves, we can only change ourselves. So, we can elevate our consciousness, that as Hal says, that's what I think we should do.
Exactly.
I feel like that's our duty to do that.
So where can people find you?
So I actually hang out on Facebook a lot. Okay. So Facebook, the Rise Up Woman, and I do have a group, Rise Up Woman. And I actually call it a Rise Up Women movement. So it is a movement, like menopause movement.
Yeah.
I want to have this movement to women collectively come together and rise up together. So that's our
That's great. Well,
Yeah.
Miki, thanks so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank
And
you so much for
you
having
know,
me.
I'm going to invite the ladies to, and anyone who's watching or listening, to send an email to
Mhm.
me, Dr. Gordon, Dr. Gordon at menopausemovement.com, and let me know your thoughts on
Yes.
this interview with Miki. And if you have any questions for her, if there's enough of them, I'll bring her back and ask the questions.
Great.
So, Miki, thanks so much.
Thank
And
you so much. Appreciate
that
it.
thanks for seeing us today.